courage, I think for a lot of men, some of the most courageous things they'll ever do is be vulnerable in front of other people.
Welcome to the Relational Parenting Podcast. I'm Jennifer Hayes, a parent coach and 20-year childcare veteran. Each week, I sit down with my own father, Rick Hayes, and discuss the complicated issues that parents face today, as well as some of the oldest questions in the book. From the latest research and the framework of my relational parenting method, we offer thought-provoking solutions to your deepest parenting struggles. Added bonuses include intergenerational wounding discussions and guest childcare experts. We will also start taking your parenting questions in episode 5, so be sure to comment with your biggest questions or email me directly at jenny@jennyb.co. Let's get started. Steve Anderson is married and has 2 sons. He's the former director of the nonprofit Boys to Men Mentoring Network of Minnesota, where he led national and international transformational weekends for boys. He has over 10 years of experience working with men and boys, developing the emotional awareness and skills they need to reach their full potential. He lived through his own dad's spectacular burnout as a teenager and works with fathers to help them avoid doing the same in their own lives. He's a certified professional coach with training in applied neuroscience. Cool. Well, welcome, Steve, to the show. Welcome, everybody else, to the Relational Parenting Podcast.
Hello.
Yeah. We're here with Steve Anderson, who is a coach for fathers, and you have your own detailed history of your experience as a child with fatherhood and into your own experience as a father, and as well as work experience working with young men. And I really, really appreciate you being here to share all of that with us today.
Yeah, very much.
Oh, and thank you very much for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. I set an intention with the podcast a few months ago, realizing that we were very female voice heavy with our guests, which is fine. We had right. And they're wonderful. And but I wanted more male voices, on the podcast and getting the perspective from fatherhood, as well as the experience of mothers. And so I'm also glad and grateful that you're here today to present that perspective as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting, right? When it comes to parenting, you'll go on Amazon, you'll see a million things for mothers, and there'll be a few things for dads, and it's just smaller, right? And so I think if you were going to pick moms or dads and say who's less likely to ask for help, right? I think most people would be like dads, right? Because we got to, we're competent. We can handle this stuff, even though our feet are like ducks underwater, right? Going like crazy. And it's like, I think one of the hurdles that so many of us men face is that getting to that place where realizing, right, that it takes strength to ask for help, right? It takes strength to say, hey, courage. I think for a lot of men, some of the most courageous things they'll ever do is be vulnerable in front of other people. Right. And so I think it's, great that we can, have conversations and podcasts where, we can talk about things so people can, hear it and get ideas and thoughts that they might not have had, if they're just with their own group.
Yeah. Vulnerability is a tough one for guys, because that's not often our role. And you got to know when and when not to.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Because there are times, right, where if you're vulnerable, people are going to look at you and go, what are you doing?
That's right.
Right. This is stop, so it's like, we got to be pick and choose. Right.
I think my husband has explained to me, because I'll tease him in different social situations and be like, why are you not in front of other people? Like, we'll leave and I'll be like, why were you acting like that? Or what I felt you tense up, or I felt you like not being yourself or whatever. And he'll be like, there was this one guy there that made me uneasy.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Like, he'll suddenly get very short with somebody that we're speaking to, and we'll leave and be in the car, and I'll be like, what what was that? And he'll be like, I didn't like the way they were talking to you, or like, and there's very much
That
a
protective
protective
thing
instinct
kicks in. Yeah.
that I think most men have. And there's a level of like, you don't want to be vulnerable. And then, you get into relationship with, if you're in a relationship with a woman and she needs your vulnerability in order to connect with you, and then your children need your vulnerability, and it's hard, like you've got to flip that switch and kind of gauge when to use it and when to be the protector. And I can only imagine that that's
And
so
so you can imagine
difficult.
too, right? If you haven't done it a lot,
Yeah.
you're gonna screw up, or
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's gonna be ugly or awkward the first couple times you do it, right? Which puts
Yeah.
even that more pressure on, right? But it's one of those things where the more you do it, you start getting practice with it. Your partner starts to
Practice.
understand better, and you can get that give and take. And I was just reading something too, and it was talking about how oftentimes, when it comes to, say, comforting somebody who's going through like a stressful
Mm.
situation,
Mm.
there's a and like, again, anytime I'm talking about generalities, of course there's more, there are generalities. There's always people who are on the very, very nurturing fathers and very so
Yeah.
just understand that. But a lot of times, for women, they will want more specific help or
Mm.
specific conversation. And a lot of times with males, it's not what you say, it's the fact that you are beside me when this is going on. So, like, if
Mm.
I've got a friend who's going through a hard time, we're- there's a chance we're not going to spend much time talking about it, but
Yeah.
I might be next to him for 20 minutes on a fishing pier, where we say 10 words and that topic has been brought up. So it's not ignoring it,
Hmm.
right? And just kind of being there. And it's like, that's helpful. You know what I mean? That's
Mm.
care. And so I think sometimes all of us can get into the I need to fix it, right? My child,
Mhm.
my partner, they're hurting. I want to fix it. And it's like, yeah, that instinct is there. But sometimes, right, what our kids need, what our partners need is just to be there with them as they go through it. And
Hmm.
um, so easy to say, right?
Yeah.
But hard to do when you're seeing your kid, crying or having a meltdown, and you're just like, oh, I want to, go in and strangle that fifth grade teacher because I
Right.
know my kid's
Oh,
getting bullied.
that's right. Hold that thought while I take care of this for you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh. So is vulnerability one of the components that you find yourself coaching dads on?
Um, so yes, and it wouldn't, and it's not like, okay, so here's today we're going to talk about vulnerability or sort of thing. It's more um about, okay, let's have a real conversation and just understand that where I'm coming from, right? I'm not coming from a place of judgment.
Mm.
Right. So, and I think that
Mhm.
that's really important, right? So first, you got to. I think it's really important that I can create um, uh, a place of, this is not. So you tell me that you're yelling at your kid. You know, I'm human. I might think to myself, stop yelling at your kid,
Hmm.
but I'm not going to
Right.
say, oh, you horrible person. You know what I mean? It's like, okay,
Right.
so you know, how do you feel about that? And then if the person's like, oh man, I feel like crap afterwards, but or the kid was in danger and so I needed to yell. And then maybe it's like, well, you know what? Maybe yelling to keep your kid from getting hit by a car
Mm.
is excellent parenting.
Yeah, that's a
But
Mhm.
justified use of force. Yeah.
yeah, right. But maybe when you're yelling because the grade isn't what you were expecting or something else happened, is that the result that you want? So, I think vulnerability is built into the process, and
Yeah.
you can't get there though unless you prove that, yes, I'm somebody you can say this stuff to, and I'm not gonna
Yeah.
you know move straight to judgment or correction. It's that fixing
Yeah.
thing. So yeah, I think it's a huge part of it, but it's interwoven as just part of the practice. And I think it's something that we can all do, right? If we're consciously aware, right? And that's the tricky part. And one of the things I call the program, the best dad program, that's the one that I do. And it's not a great dad. And
Mm.
it's the best dad. If I had parentheses, I'd put in the moment,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm exhausted, right, maybe the best dad I can be is just that I cool it and don't respond to something that's going on and say, right, because I'm tired, I'm stressed out from work. My response is not going to be proportional. So, hey, kids, this is important. We're gonna deal with it, but not today.
Yeah.
Because I'm not that spot, right? Whereas another day, it was a great day at work. You come home, you got energy, and all of a sudden this thing's blown up, and you're like, because you're in the right place, you can be like, hey, what's going on? Come on, tell me what's going on. And you can, to be your best in the moment, has so much going into it. And that's one of the things I think it's important. There's two things that I think men should really, that help men out a lot. And one is understanding the mechanics of our brain, right? Why? Because so much of and you've even, the last two, or not the last two, but a couple of your hosts were talking about stuff that could have been straight out of neuroscience, right?
Yeah.
Feng Shui, setting up your environment. One of the things I took a neuroscience for coaches, this 14-week course, and it was awesome. And one of the things it talked about is you have to set your environment up environment always wins. Right?
Yeah.
So if you want to lose 10 pounds, it's not going to happen if you keep bringing donuts into the kitchen.
Yeah.
So, there's a simple one. Or if you want to play catch with your daughter, you make sure that the glove and ball is somewhere where you can find it and you don't have to go searching in the garage or a closet and you're going to lose the momentum. And so
make it easy.
Some of the things, right? Like just figuring out how the brain responds to the situation and how emotions get kind of responses get hardwired in. That's a huge thing. The other thing goes into the stories that we tell, right? The mythology of the mythology of being a father, right? What to me does it mean to be a father? And what are the other stories, right? And some of us have been propped up. So we have a funny story about everything we do, nothing could go wrong. And, that's going to set up its whole bunch of things that don't work. Some of us have been told, right, that we're not worth it, right? Maybe some, parent wasn't emotionally there, and so we've internalized that. And so there's either one of those stories, right? You're great and perfect and can't make mistakes, or you're not worth it. Both of those, how do they not show up, right?
Those are
So
both. Yeah.
looking at and rewriting those can be huge in changing how we react.
It's a lot of work. You got to be like you're talking about, awareness and practice. That's when you go through something like that, to get through something like that, that's a lot of work. You have to be forgiving of yourself to make that journey back through.
Yeah, I put it like this. Sorry,
that's okay. Go ahead.
Being a parent is like being on a journey, and they give you the packing list after you arrive at your destination.
Yes.
I
yes.
like that.
Thanks.
It's a great metaphor. Or analogy.
I end up saying that is like being a good parent requires you to look backwards at your own childhood and where you're at now because of it, and then reweaving the stories you want to pass on to your children. Like, becoming a parent requires you to go backwards first.
Yeah, and here's the tricky part too, because and I've done this myself. We need to be the parent our children need, and not the one that we wanted growing up. Because when I started in this, right, it's like, I'm going to be the dad I needed. And it's like, whoa, okay, that's a starting point. But it's like, Steve, your boys are very different than you. And it's like, oh crap. Now I gotta figure out what they need. But it's a decent starting point, but it's a starting point, definitely not the end.
Yeah.
I agree with that. And I've read that quote 100 times online. There's a meme that says, if you want to be a good parent or whatever, if you want to be a good parent, be the adult you needed when you were a kid. And I think that as an initial mindset shift, I think that's fantastic place to start, like you said. But then there's also like each child that you have is going to be very unique and very different and have different needs. And so your job as the parent is not just to parent yourself, because then you're just projecting yourself onto your kids. It's to look, it's to be very intentional and to pay close attention and get to know your children very intimately, individually, and to parent them the way they each need to be parented. Um,
Yeah, I think that meme is great for, uncles and aunts and adults working with teenagers. And it was
mm,
really a part of, I'd call it's a part of my
Hmm.
healing process. Was so when I grew up, and just super short, both of my folks dealt with mental illness. So
mm,
Yeah.
I had food, there was shelter, but there was challenges, right? And there were things that I did.
yeah.
My coping mechanisms looked good on the outside, and actually they were right. If I was really good in school, nobody would ask about what's going on at home, right? So my coping
Mm,
strategies on the other, I'm doing well in school, and people don't know what's going on. And that, though, was not moving me forward emotionally, like where I needed to be, to be in a, healthy relationships as an adult, and just
mhm,
things like that. And when I went through there's Mankind Project. They have a really neat, good program for a weekend where you start looking at those stories, right, and rewriting the tapes. But after that, I did that, and I'm like, "Ooh, this is good." I'm starting to touch in on learning to express myself, because I've kept all of this, buried down.
Yeah.
And then through there, they're saying, "Hey, there's this group, Boys to Men. There's Mentoring Network of Minnesota, and they mentor teens." And I'm like, "Oh, let's okay, I'm gonna go check this out." So I went, and there's a weekend training. I think a lot of us meant love a good weekend training, right? So you go and you do something, you got a
Get you
purpose, and you're
fired
gonna
up.
leave
you're
with
like high
tools.
when you leave,
Big
yeah.
jump.
Yeah, give me some tools, I'm gonna fix it.
Yeah.
And when we walked in, they had part of the group was actually the teenage boys who are part of the organization. And right, walk in, and one of them goes, "Where were you?" And it's like, where, like, oh man, right? Because, and it was just, it just hit. And that's where I started, right? I'm okay, I want to be the adult for these teenage boys that I'm mentoring, that I wanted in my life, or that I needed in my life. Right.
Hmm.
And so
Mhm,
it was a great place to start. And so if you're, I think if there's anybody out there listening, you're going, "Where do I start?" Yeah, start with that one. And then just know,
mhm.
after you do that, then you can get Jenny to what you were talking about, right? And more, great place to start. But then it's about knowing that the people that you're with, understanding their uniqueness and their individuality, and being there for the adult that they need in their lives.
Yeah.
Is But that takes a while. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
50 plus. It's like I didn't. It, and I was slow to the slow to the game. You have to give yourself some grace.
That's
Right.
right. You have to give yourself a chance to dig out of whatever, a lot of people who have had trauma, I think you have to have a reason to go become self-aware and do the digging, to do the work. So that I think there's always, it seems like there's a lot of times some work to be done to dig back out. You don't come up with this stuff when you're 16,
Yeah.
it's
And for me, um, doing that work, right, and working with the mentoring, it's, oh, and I don't think enough people realize about, when it comes to volunteering, like, "Oh, Steve, you were volunteering with boys, what a great guy." And it's like, thanks. But really, there's a very good selfish reason to volunteer and to help people,
yeah.
Mm,
right? Because, man, does that feel good. I mean,
yeah.
it just, it feels good. You talk about purpose. What are you going to do today? Well, I'm going to,
Yeah.
am I going to watch 6 hours of television or a screen, or am I going to go help some, be involved in something for a couple hours? And it's like, man, usually that being involved in a couple hours, unless you've overextended yourself, and that's a whole other thing that, right, that men can do, that is, and that's self-care, right? To me, helping other people is
Mhm.
absolute form
Yeah.
of self-care, because it gets it out of your head.
But
You
we were
hear
meant
other
to live that
parental,
way. We were meant to be in community and
yeah.
to once you're, an adult, you reach back to the next generation and help lift them up and bring them forward. And yeah, we were meant to work together.
Back to
Yes.
guys, we were talking too. It helps to be in a group sometimes with guys. It's
Mm,
one on one can be awkward sometimes, right? I mean, it's private too, but it sometimes when you're in a group of guys and somebody's brave and goes first and says, "Hey, I've got a challenge here," right? Then this huge discussion will kick off with shared experiences, and you being part of the group, you get to hear other perspectives and go aha and recall things. And yeah, that's a real good thing. Groups of guys talking
Yeah,
like that, but boys to men, yeah.
yeah, and it's scary, right? But if you're that first person who talks too, it's like also that's practice in leadership,
Yeah.
and there's
mm,
that vulnerability you're asking about too. It's like, the question I have for you, Jenny, is you have been talking about going backwards, and I think that's awesome. And you're doing a podcast with your dad. So my
yeah.
guess is you got a pretty decent relationship going on. So
Hopefully.
how have you, how does that because I think a lot of like I ended up as an adult having a pretty good relationship with my parents. They've both passed now, but there was definitely a long period where it was like kind of, hi, see you on the holidays, right?
Yeah.
What do you think? What's gone into you having a strong adult relationship with your dad, and how do you think that shapes things that you do?
Ooh.
Yeah. Ooh.
I um well, I think that there was a lot of teenage years, middle school and teenage years where we had like really deep conversations about very real life things. We would talk about parenting. We would talk about my relationships, like my boyfriend, and
Boys and
and
yeah.
what it meant to be a girlfriend or a boyfriend in a relationship. And we would talk about religion and politics, and there was never really, I never felt like there was a subject that was off limits. And so I think that laid the groundwork for, and then there was college where I had a bunch of mental health issues that he, came and
Caught up
helped.
with you. Cancer
Yeah.
caught up with her, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, and
So
I mean, he helped find a psychiatrist. He was there helping me through that. And then, yeah, I mean, I've been in Colorado for over 11 years now, and he's still in Illinois. So we don't see each other um, very often. And it's very much usually on a holiday or something. Um, but when I was starting to have the idea for this podcast, I was thinking to myself, who could I talk to on camera, because I am not a show up on social media, take pictures of myself, be on camera kind of person at all. Um and I was like, who would I be the most comfortable and natural and authentic
mhm,
talking to,
mhm.
and who would have a perspective to offer on this podcast? And it wasn't even like a list of people. It was just immediately it was my dad. And then from there it became like, ooh, like this is cool. There's a
Mhm.
whole intergenerational thing. And we've had, and that's not to say like we've fought. We have had disagreements.
Drag
I
stuff up
have
sometimes.
We lived together for a while while I was in college, and there were conflicts, and I've called him out on some parenting stuff, especially when I got older. And he actually presented a note that I had written him once
That's your
uh,
and my
at my
dad's speech.
wedding
Yeah.
during his father of the bride speech. And that I had called him out on because I found his cigarettes in his car
I
once.
I took to smoking in the car thinking I was being
Getting
sneaky.
away with it, yeah.
Yeah.
And I gave him a full I remember giving him like, he was sitting in a chair in the living room, and I was standing up, and I wagging my finger at him, giving him a full-blown lecture on being alive to walk me down the aisle.
Little baby.
Oh,
So
nice.
so I think that there has just been a level of authenticity allowed inside of our relationship.
That's the word, is authenticity. I've always tried to be
Even
authentic with you.
even when he was imperfect or I was imperfect or he didn't like what I was saying and yelled back or like what even though it was imperfect, I think that there was a rare level of authenticity that we had. And ever since starting this podcast, I've had so many women tell me how lucky I am to have what I
Wow.
have with my dad because they don't have it. They don't have like they might love their dad loves
Right.
them. They like everything is great, but it's not, I guess,
Hmm.
as deep or as intimate.
We talked at the outset of this about how, there weren't a lot of other father-daughter podcasts out
If
there,
any, I
and
don't think there's any that we
I've
found.
I found a couple, but they went on 10 episodes and kind of petered out. And
Oh,
I suspect it's because they ran into difficult subjects and, didn't it got too painful or something.
mm,
Because we had some, we're kind of smoothing things out now, but it drug stuff up, and we had some pretty
yeah.
serious discussions,
We
especially
had
in the early
some
days, you
triggering
know?
behind the scenes
Well,
conversations.
Yeah.
see, and I think though that it's so important though that too that you share that,
Yeah.
right, for people looking at this relationship. And
Oh, yeah.
one of the things I know, and I think so when I met Katie, that's my wife, her boys were 4 and 9, and so luckily, and I had the benefit of been I'd been in working with boys and boys to men, so I worked with a lot of boys whose parents were divorced, and so
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
knew, some of the things to avoid. I also, I knew number one to is going to my job was number one to just be patient, and,
Yeah.
give them time for the change.
Being the
And
new guy.
yes, it
Yeah.
um oh yeah, I forgot where I was going for a second. And this, but I know that at some point, I am sure both of my boy, well, one's already he's a young man in college, and the other's 10th grade. So they're getting. I have no doubt in my 20s or 30s. I don't know what it's going to be, but they'll each probably in their own way, come back and say, "Dad, what the hell were you doing when?"
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and they're going to say something that maybe I'll remember, maybe I'm not, and I'm preparing myself. So in
Mhm.
that, it's good to come, and then it's just like, you know,
You don't
take it
wanna do
in.
it too much. You don't wanna second guess and overthink too much, but you do, back to the mindful and awareness thing, you do wanna have a good reason for what you do.
Oh
So
yeah.
before you have a big reaction to anything, you kinda wanna go, "Yeah, okay, I can explain this in a court of law," or it's like, "I can explain this to my child, why I'm doing this way, why I punished, why I didn't."
Well, let's say this, Rick. I hope I can explain it. And if
Well,
I
that's
can't,
right.
I'm gonna go. I'm a. I'll, I don't know. Gosh, that sounds really stupid in hindsight. Or I might go.
There you go, yeah.
It was the. I thought it made sense at the moment. It didn't, and then right. At least, no matter what happens, right? How much he won't be carrying it around,
Mhm.
right? This resentment, this
Yeah,
thing, and if I just do um, an okay job of responding and taking it in, we're going to be able to move forward. And
yeah.
one of the things that my dad wasn't able to do for the longest time, and it drove me crazy as a son, he um, was gone a lot. Actually, moved out of the house when I was a teenager. He had to go and retrain for a new career, and so he was
Mhm.
Mm.
out because he burned out on the main one, and he was just gone and emotionally unavailable. And when I would bring this up in my 20s and early 30s, he would say, and I would, it was like a mantra. His dad died when he was 5. End of story. And I'm like, as an adult, I can say, "Oh man, I am so sorry.
Mhm.
That your dad died when you were 5. That must have been horrible. I know your mom dated alcoholics,
Mhm.
and you were anxious as a kid, and you throw all of that together. It's and I'm your
Yeah.
son, damn it. You weren't there for me." And it's
Yeah.
like, and
Yeah.
he was so angry, and he told me this later. He was so angry at God for taking his dad, and that's the way that he looked
Mhm.
at it, that he couldn't, until he got past that, he wasn't in a spot to own how he showed up as a father in my life.
Yeah.
And so there was always, when he couldn't, and it wasn't like, I mean, I was just looking for acknowledgement,
Yep.
and as long as he couldn't do that, there was always an extra distance between us that, maybe I could have done a better job on, but I wasn't. Because, like,
Yeah.
no, damn it,
Yeah. Yeah.
the son in me just needed that acknowledgement. And then when he got to the point where he could, it was like, okay,
Yes.
now we can go forward because we're not coming from this imaginary past,
Yeah.
right? That didn't have, ups and downs. Because if we only talk about the ups, that's
Yep.
that's make believe. And if we're only
Yeah.
focused on the down, that's make believe too. But we got to go for both. To me,
Yeah.
need to be in that story.
I want to hop backwards to the very beginning of our conversation because you said something um, that I think is really important for parents to hear. And that's that being the best version of you is going to look different every single day. Being at 100% is your, let's see, I read this once, and I'm probably going to quote it incorrectly, but it was life changing for me because everyone's always like, give 100% every day, give 100% every day. And 100% is going to look different for you every day. So
Mhm.
I might have a day where I talk lovingly to my spouse, where I get my whole my whole to-do list done, where I get the dogs outside for all the exercise they need, or where I get my kids to school on time and I eat the salad and I, do all the things. And the next day I might be sleep deprived and exhausted or I tweaked my back during my workout yesterday when I was giving 100%,
That's
and I might not be capable of all of those things that next day. And so my 100% is going to look different than it did the day before. And I think well, let me ask you this. Do you, especially working with men, do you run into men who have super high expectations, like unrealistic expectations of themselves woven into these stories in their head?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that's so much of the pressure, right, we put on ourselves, right? That and now if you think about too, the expectations have have shifted, and it hasn't been a lessening of any of the workload. It's like, so there's still that expectation that you're going to put in the long hours, but you're also now supposed to be home and available. And it's like, wait a second, that's physically impossible, right? So
Yep.
so you know some of it is expectations. So much of it too is when you come home, for example, it's like, well, or maybe you've been home all day, right? Because half of us are, have moved from our home office, right? Well, um what does your partner need? What does your dog need? And what do your pets need? And it's like, there's a ratio, right? I mean, sometimes you're going to
Yep.
have two people in the house, who really need you. What do you do? How do you handle that? Sometimes it might be, man, I might be feeling just, maybe I was, looking at a picture of my dad, and I'm feeling really like nostalgic, and I want to have this, so I'm going to go, bond with my son. And he's really wants to study for a math test, or he's online with his friend who lives in Florida who he hasn't seen, in a month. So it's like, man, he's going to hang out with his friend in Florida, and I'm going to, I think sometimes too, we show up and the people around us, um, are living their own lives and have their own things going on. So it's how often are we like totally in sync, right? Like I get
Right.
home, or I don't get home. I work from home, right? But it's like, so I'm downstairs, my wife is upstairs. How often do we both come up at the same time? And she's just like, I had a great, I just had a great meeting. I feel like joking around, and I come up and say, you know what? I just had a great podcast. Boy, aren't we both in a good mood? Let's have fun. Ha ha ha. It's like, no, I have a good podcast during or something, and you go up, and it was just a terrible meeting, or vice versa, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, son comes
It's
home and
complicated.
he, yeah,
It's a
goes straight up
complicated
to his
system.
room. Like, okay, was that a big deal or not a big deal? Or he just like, so, it's that, I guess, what happened when you were saying 100%. That was like, I'm like, ooh, I didn't like it. Right, that whole, because it's like, there's no reserve. I don't even know that if I'm 100% in dad mode, then I'm 0% in husband mode, and you know
Yeah.
what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I need at least 2% pet so they don't die.
Right.
More than 2% husband mode so our relationship stays strong.
Plants.
So yeah, right.
Yeah.
They're too much work. I only got
Once in a while.
100% of time, Rick. I got 40 here, 30 there.
How do I
Plants.
slice this pie? Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, thank you for coming back to that, because sometimes we do really need a kick in the butt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look at, and other times we got to like, hold on a second. You might not be doing, you might not be the parent that you want to be, that you can be. Okay, you've got this acknowledgement. This is awesome. Now, great. How do you start restructuring
Mm-hmm.
how things are set up, right? Even the physical stuff. How do you start rescheduling your schedule? How do you start looking at the story you've been telling yourself? Seeing, there's so much that you can do to think about. If I'm not happy right now, and I make some big drastic change, my kids aren't going to believe it, for starters,
That's
right?
right.
Because if
Mm-hmm.
I've been a workaholic for the first 10 years of their lives, and then come home and say, I'm not, kids, we're going to spend so much time together, and I'm not going to be a workaholic. They'd be, yay. They're not going to believe that. And
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
would they? You got to
Yeah.
Yeah.
prove it. Now, if I didn't even tell them, but I said, you know what? I'm leaving 15 minutes earlier every day from work, right? Just start with
Mm-hmm.
something small. All of a sudden, I'm home 15 minutes earlier, right? Or if I say, you know what? I'm going to get up 15 minutes earlier, and I'm going to be there at breakfast for at
Mm-hmm.
least 5 minutes, or
Yeah.
something. So I think, and then now you get a positive shift, right? You haven't restructured your whole world, because my goodness, how intimidating and chaotic is
Right.
that going to
Yeah. Too
be,
big, too much. Yeah.
right? But what's a one small change you could make today or this week, right?
Yeah.
And try it out. And maybe it's
Yeah.
terrible. We get to be terrible parents sometimes, and it sucks because we don't want to be, but it's like, ooh, I totally missed that conversation.
Yeah.
Shit. Excuse my
Yeah.
language, but
Yeah. Yeah.
so, okay, what happened? What happened in that situation? What was I thinking? To have that time to reflect a little bit.
Yeah.
Do a
And
little post-mortem on it. Yeah.
right. So the next time, maybe I handle it a little bit better, right? And if I handle it a little bit better and I keep going like that, hopefully what our kids are going to remember is, look at dad. He tried.
Mm-hmm.
He changed. Things got better in this area,
Yeah.
because they're noticing. What else
They
do they
will
got to pay
notice.
attention to?
You
You know,
bet.
they can see. And so, and at the end of the day, at the end of the week, right? Um, if you can look back and say, it's like, okay, what did I do well today? Right.
Yeah.
Cool. And is there something I can do better? And
If you can ask your
kind of,
kids that,
yeah. And,
that acknowledging, like if you messed up in a conversation and you go back a day or two later after
oh,
reflecting and say, "Hey, I really don't like the way that I handled that conversation with you and I'd like to try again. Can we try again?"
Hmm.
And or even just I didn't show up as my best self in that conversation for you and I'm sorry. Or just any acknowledgement, even straightforward to your child,
Yeah,
admitting that you're an imperfect human sets the example that
oh,
they're also allowed to make mistakes and come back and try again.
that's right. And they
Jenny,
don't
that's
expect you to
awesome.
be perfect anymore. Absolutely. And it keeps those little wounds from, things you didn't realize
Festering
you
for
did,
30
you know.
years.
Ideally, it would cut down on those hanging around forever.
Right. And that gives them the opportunity too, that a week later to come up to you and say, I really didn't, I kind of screwed up in
There
school.
you go.
Right. Or I wasn't telling you the truth when I said I'm not smoking those cigarettes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right. That's right.
So,
Exactly. No, I think a lot of it is priorities. I know you're making me think back on my history, and I remember making the kids a priority. I mean, you've got time. We're mostly talking about slicing up time. How do we spend our time? And then money. And, you have to become aware. I think what we're talking about is you have to become aware that there are finite resources. You have your energy, your tank, your charge, whatever the best metaphor is. And some days you're going to have a full tank. Sometimes you're not. And there's going to be circumstantial stuff, and so you have to spend a couple of seconds in the back of your head periodically through the day saying, how am I going to expend my energy? What's important now? Who needs what? And it's complicated. I used to complain that there was not a book written on this. Raising kids, being a parent, they've been doing this a while now. Somebody ought to have made a good text. And the problem is it's just too complicated and dynamic. It's you got to just stay at it.
well, and how about this too? I think there is opportunity in our obligations. So we've got two
Mm,
boys,
Hmm.
and my oldest son. So Katie and my taught my oldest how to drive, right? And just temperamentally and everything worked out. That just made sense.
Okay.
So I'm teaching my youngest son how to drive, and so in
Oh.
Minnesota, it's got to be like 50 hours in the daylight and like 15 at night.
Oh my, that's a
And
lot.
yeah, and it's like um, he's a good driver. Definitely, every time we do something new, it's stressful. Both of our hearts are going boom, 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 boom. But it's like, so here's something that I have to do, and as I'm doing, I'm like, holy crap! I got 65 hours with my son
Yeah.
side by side in a car.
Yeehaw.
Yeah. And so a lot of times we are not going to have a deep conversation at all because that will get
no.
us killed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Never driven the
Yeah.
speed before, right?
Yeah. You
He
got to pick your
needs
times. Yeah.
to focus. But we're together, right? Maybe he goes through a stop sign. Maybe I'm like, whoa. And he's like, okay, learning. And, I mean, he's can see opportunities for correction, right? And doing it in a way that, both correction, hey, son, you went too fast there. I'd slow down, right? To nice job on that turn, right? So you just, all
There you
these
go.
small interactions and no radio because he's learning how to drive,
Hmm.
smaller, light conversations. And it's funny if a conversation starts going a little bit past light, it's like, nope, we got to shut it down because new drivers, the three of us, we've been driving for, 15 to 40 years. We can do a lot of stuff on autopilot, but in the
Yeah.
beginning,
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
But that obligation is is great. So
I used
there's
to live
opportunity there.
I used to live for chances to trap my kids in the car with me. That's where Jenny and I had
Oh,
we'd have screaming contests so you could scream higher pitched. And it wasn't all fun and games, but I used to look for opportunities to be one-on-one or one-on-three, whatever, with the kids, because we had the best conversations. There's nothing else to do. There's no distraction.
When he was driving.
When I was
Yeah.
driving,
I I love side by side stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because there's something, and it's not just boys too. I think there's something about, if you're side by side in a car, or maybe you're side by side and you're both at drawing or painting on a canvas, or just any fun
yeah,
side by side, without that eye
Mhm.
contact, can actually counterintuitively lead to better conversations because
somehow
It's less intimidating to be vulnerable if you're
yeah.
yeah,
not looking directly at each other.
Jenny brought
yep.
that up in a previous podcast. Something about being like this instead of like
Mhm.
this. Yeah,
Yeah, and you put a crayon in some smaller kid's hand, and you're just drawing, and asking about the day, you might get more out of there, right? Or then you
Mhm.
can, um, you know, you can also do, things like draw your classroom, and then you draw too and stuff, and all of a sudden, what I mean, and you can
Mhm.
look at the picture and tell me about the picture.
we get a little EQ going on in there. How do
Yeah,
they?
well,
Yeah,
and if you can see, if the teacher has demon horns on, right, your kid's either very creative and
exactly,
funny, right, or there's a
exactly.
bad relationship going on.
Yeah.
So there's a you
How
know,
fat is that belt? What do they call that? Projectives? I forget now. Anyway,
I don't know.
you extrapolate things from drawings.
Mm.
yes,
Yeah, yeah. Just sitting around coloring with the kids.
There's research backed science on the importance of play with children, the
oh
importance of play for all of us.
Yeah,
There's research backed for anyone at any age. The pointlessness of doing something that you just enjoy,
yeah,
just to have fun.
yeah,
But specifically in children 0 to 7, there's a lot of research now that shows that children need play in order to connect with us. They need us to play, and not 24/7 and not all
yeah.
day, every day. Like, your children will learn to entertain themselves and play together.
Hmm.
And in fact, uninterrupted play is extremely important for their neural development. But you will have a deeper conversation with your 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old when you sit down and play cars or sit down and color or do whatever they're doing. And you can pop a few questions in there about their day
Yeah.
or, their teacher or whatever. Um, they will talk to you. And sometimes you don't have to say anything. They'll just start talking to you because their
Hmm.
hands are busy. And so
Hmm.
now their brain can kind of turn on. Whereas if you're like
Yeah.
interviewing your child in the back seat about, like, how was your day? What'd you do today? What'd you do this? You'll be like, I don't know, whatever,
yeah,
you
interrogation.
know?
Just
Yeah.
Well,
the
there's
thing.
something just about burning off that energy
Yeah.
too, right? If you
Yeah.
run around and it's like it's like burning off energy sort of lowers some of the defenses too, because it's like, oh, that energy's out, so now I can,
Yeah.
you know talk about something else. And I love,
Hmm.
um, one of the coolest memories I have from Boys to Men, and this is around rough and tumble play. So we had boys
Hmm.
from 11 to 17, and that play is so important. So is rough and tumble, because if you think about, and this is not, I mean, some people immediately start thinking Fight Club, and it's like, no, people, it's like,
No.
rough and tumble
Not
play
Fight
is
Club.
when you're actually, physically manipulating things. And this is very important because you learn multiple things, like, hey, if I do this too far, it hurts me, it hurts that other person, and,
Hmm.
and so
Hmm.
there's a
Hmm.
thing about learning about how you can hurt, you're not trying to, you're learning about that, you're learning trust. And
Limits
so,
and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, one of my favorite, and it was, there was this one very big guy, um, and and at one point, and they just had like a break between activities. There were two. He was basically wrestling with two small boys, who, like, one was around his waist and one was over his shoulder. Right? And I mean, it looked like, I was like, it just, and they were laughing and having fun, and it was just so beautiful. And right, the big guy knew how to wrestle with these smaller guys and not hurt them.
Yeah.
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 And the little guys weren't being dumb either, right? Because I'm sure if one of them would have, hit him in the groin, he probably would have dropped him a little
Yeah.
fast
Poke
and
him in the
things would
Right.
change.
nose or
So
something.
it's
Yeah.
like that play, is huge for trust in connection. And there's definitely, like, I remember when there was a part of me, and I told you I quit 10th football at 10th grade, because uh, there was a part of me that absolutely loved putting my shoulder pads into somebody else's shoulder pads, right? And just that push and conflict,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
When they're 5 inches taller, 80 pounds more, and I'm all of a sudden looking up at the sky on a kickoff return, I'm like, okay, no, that's different. But there's,
Less
I think,
fun.
not in every boy, right? But in a lot of boys, that
Mhm.
push, that physical thing is like just something. There's and for some, right, an innate drive for it, right? And there's
Mhm.
others like, no, I'll get my contact another way. It's just hug, dude. It's fine,
There's
right?
some kind
Yeah.
of emotional payoff in that. It
Yeah,
feels good to release that energy or whatever. Yeah.
Well, there's a physical, so there's different levels of need, different spaces of need. And we all have physical needs, we all have emotional needs, we all have mental stimulation needs, we all have spiritual needs. And in a lot of boys, like Steve said, not all boys, but in a vast majority of boys, again, there's research backed science showing the need of boys to have rough and tumble play, and
Mm-hmm.
girls too, but it's
Mm-hmm.
higher in boys, in boy
Mm-hmm.
children.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these kids that have been diagnosed with ADHD in the classroom because they're expected to sit still for 7 hours a day, they're like, this is insanity. The kids need to be outside.
You need to
Kids would
play
never.
some dodgeball.
Yeah, no one was and not for 30 minutes a day, that like for 4 or 5 hours a day. Like, we should be outside. Our children should be outside, running around, exploring, touching things, trees, grass, rocks. What is this? How does this work? Like, our physical connection to our world is our first teacher,
Mm-hmm.
well,
of how we exist here.
I've got a funny subbing story around that. I sub for fun, not too often, because that stuff's exhausting. I mean,
Yeah.
teaching at
Yeah.
college, piece of cake, K through 12.
Little kids. Yeah.
No,
Especially the
but
sub teacher, man, you get
oh
abused.
yeah. But I do it about once every 10 days, right? And seeing the different grades. And I'm in this fourth grade
Cool.
class, and they're starting to get squirrely. And I've got boys to men experience. I know what's going on. Just what you talked about, the energy. I'm like, all right, we're playing a game. When I say one, everybody runs in place. I say two, everybody does jumping jacks. Three, I can't remember, and four, push-ups, right?
Calisthenics, baby.
And so
Mhm.
we're all standing up. I'm like, one, and I'm doing it too, and everybody's running. And then I'm like, three, and you could tell they're waiting for the push-ups, right? Two, and I say push-ups, and all of a sudden there was only one group, and of course it was boys, right? They're going to explore more. Where one guy is like putting his feet on the back of the other, and I'm like, no, just
Oh
regular
boy.
push-ups.
Oh boy.
But the cool
Nice.
was there was a group of girls who got into it more than the boys. And there was this one girl who was
Mhm.
just kicking
Cool.
out the push-ups, and the girls around her like, yeah, and it was just, and it's like, we did that for 2 minutes, burned off some energy, and then they're like, okay, and we went back to doing stuff, and it was fine. But yeah, um that running around, I think whenever I hear, right, anybody cutting down and reducing the recess time in the activity, it's like
Mm.
that's so short-sighted and against everything we know about kids
Yeah.
psychology and learning. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
it's
There's a minimum
it's
that's going to have diminishing returns.
but how about this, to turn this to parents, right? So these kids, these fourth graders, this we played a game where I said one number and they did jumping jacks. I said two, never, not the most complicated thing. So, we can
Yeah.
do simple stuff with our kids. If your kid is squirrely and needs to burn off some energy, there's you can so that you can do it with them. I have a friend Darby. His daughter. He said she's either going to destroy America or save it because of the amount of energy she
I have a
has.
couple
And
girls in my life that we'd say that
yeah,
about.
and it's legit. And when I was over visiting him one time, he had a big backyard, and he'd be like, "Hey, Isabel, big backyard. Run to the fence and touch it, and come back." And she zoom, zoom, and she could do that. 8 times before she's getting winded, and it was like that was a parenting survival
she,
strategy,
she
Yes.
needed the challenge. It did just, yeah.
and just zoom.
That was always when I was nannying full time. I like that was just out of like there was no question about how we would start our day. I didn't care if it was snowy 0 degrees outside. I would show up, the kid, if it was morning time, we'd eat breakfast, and then man, we got outside. It was the first part of our day, and it got me outside too, because I couldn't just be like, all right, like bundle up, see you later.
Good for the parents too.
It
Yeah.
would get me outside and running around and playful, and like they'd be giggling, and it get me more motivated and laughing and making things fun outside. And it's like, and girls need it too. And all kids need it. But I think I don't know. I think we get so used to being in classrooms and offices and in our houses and doing chores that like
Too many screens.
we forget.
Yeah.
And your kids are going to do what you do. And so if
Yeah.
you sit on your phone for 2 hours every morning to start your day, like that's what your kids are watching as the example of, but if you open a book, or if you get your shoes on and go outside, or, go on a family walk or whatever, you're setting them up for the habits for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, and it's also a good place where you're not a hypocrite if you're also exercising.
Yeah, telling
Right?
your
So
kid
you
to
can
do
use
stuff
it.
that you don't do is just you're going to lose that battle all of the time.
Don't smoke.
Yeah. But I mean, but that can be great, right? If you're like, hey, if you're sitting all day, that's messing with you too. So it can be great for you get to be a good role model, but you also get off your butt and walk around the block with the dog too, or the kids are, go to
Yeah.
the park. So, that's so many, a lot of those things that we, sometimes can feel resentment for or good grief, I have to do this. If we
Mhm.
can reframe and look at it about, oh man, this is awesome because you know what? They're only going to want to hold my hand on walks for so long,
Mhm.
So long. Yeah.
right? And then it's going to be side by side, and then it's going to be I got friends,
Yep.
Windows
So
and closing. Next thing you know, they're in Colorado.
yeah,
Well, that your opportunity and obligation. I love that phrasing. My my husband he's very energized in the mornings. But he wakes up and he's instantly ready to tackle his to-do list. And his to-do list might be sitting down at the computer and paying bills first thing in the
Yeah.
morning, which when he wakes up and his body is ready to go and he's sipping his coffee, the last thing he needs is to sit down at his desk and try to focus. And he's been learning very much recently, that the first, like, we got a new puppy a few months ago, and that puppy needs walked. Okay. And if that puppy does not get his morning walk, he is a terror for the rest of the day. And so, Lewis huffs and puffs, and it's so annoying. And I have this obligation now. We have to walk him in the morning or else blah, blah, blah. And it's cold and all these things. But he, over the several months of having this dog, he's realizing how much a morning walk it makes him feel so much better for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Or if he gets up and does his workout, does his calisthenics and then walks the dog and then comes home and sips his coffee and gets going on his to-do list, like he's a happier human for the rest of the day. And I just think, we're halfway to having our first kid, and I just keep looking forward to like all the opportunities inside the obligations. I really like
Hmm.
that phrasing that you said, Steve,
Hmm.
because I'm like, oh, newborn phase, that's going to be hard for all of the reasons. But then once it's like they need taken care of and they need this and that, I'm going to have so much more external like motivation to care for them versus like, and which will help me take care of myself and be more like movement oriented and outdoor oriented and all of these things. Whereas it's when it's just me, it's so easy to just like, I'm just going to post up on the couch and scroll on my phone.
They're not; those things are not mutually exclusive. You can be taking care of your kid and be learning something yourself, right? Working on some kind of skill
Yeah.
or internal growth thing. It's like what's the saying where you can do what you love or love what you do. You can learn to love what you do, and if you're even though it may not be your favorite thing in the world, it's about mindset. It's about priorities. It's about all the stuff we're talking about. Being aware, growing where you're at with what you start where you start at.
What are some of the most I want to bring fathers back into this on the highlight, and I want to know what are some of like two or three of the most common things that when dads come to you for coaching, what do you see most commonly underlying fatherhood these days?
In the conversations that I've had, I think underneath it, whether it's work life balance, right? Getting the and I had one dad who has a podcast who talked about he likes work life harmony as a better way to think about it. You need to be
That's
in
a better
Mm,
harmony of the
goal.
two.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Underneath that or in underneath like relationship challenges is is a sense of helplessness. And
mm,
Hmm.
and I think and that is such a it's such a uh brutal to feel powerless, right? Like I have to keep this job that I hate, but it's making me a bad dad because I'm coming out stressed out, or
mm,
Yeah.
how do I, maybe and I don't have this specifically, but I've heard this from other friends, right? About how in a divorce the child is being used as a tool to punish, and
yeah.
so
Everybody's worried about their own thing. Yep.
yeah, so I think under so much of this is a sense of powerlessness,
Mm,
right? And that they're at a spot where it's like I can't do anything, and and what a terrible if you feel like you can't do anything, it doesn't matter what you do. It just it
If you don't know
destroys
what to do.
motivation, the will.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the whole it's definitely I think um a part of it is this is how it's always been. So it's very difficult, whatever that has been for the person, very difficult to see a new way, about it. And
mm,
sometimes if you're in a rut, you can't
yeah.
see above it.
Yeah.
And it's so, it's hard to, you have to figure out, okay, how can you start, what's one thing to move you out of the rut? And then, over time it gets to open up. But the underlying sense of powerlessness, um,
Mm,
I think you can pick your fatherhood complaint, and there's
yeah.
probably an
Yeah.
element uh, of that in there.
Yeah. Overcoming the
Interesting.
inertia, finding the energy, finding in yourself the energy to be more aware and then go search for solutions. And you have to peel off some of that energy to change course, you
And
know?
Rick, you mentioned this too. I know for myself, one of the things that I had to deal with, there is a fear of being authentic,
Yes, there
right?
is.
Because if
Yeah.
I am really who I am and I start telling people that I don't like that, which I've never mentioned before, I do like this,
Mm-hmm.
you
Hmm.
know, how are they going to react? And the and I think Brene Brown, right, will tell you being
Yeah,
vulnerable, you build relationships, and
yeah,
she's absolutely right. And being vulnerable can absolutely be used against you, and some people will. So
Yeah.
yep.
it's not a freebie. I wouldn't tell everybody, well, just go be vulnerable, Dave. It'll work. It's like,
Yeah.
well,
You got to find a spot to do it. It's, when
yeah,
you're at work, when you're in charge of something, that's probably not the time. You don't find a lot of vulnerable ship captains in the middle of war. I'm sitting here thinking about the movie Greyhound, right? People are looking to you for answers. That's not the time to be weepy. Um, Compartmentalization you were talking about before. But it's by the same token, when you come home to your family, that's the time to turn it on and be
Mhm.
authentic with your kids. You gotta, I think for guys, the work home balance thing, I think the tough thing is, well, when I'm home, it's and masking, the idea of people wearing masks in different roles and stuff, as a dad, you can work on my mask at home. People who know me at work would not know me at home.
Yeah.
Who's that goofy guy rolling around with all these wrestling all these kids at the same time, and that I think that's a good place to start. And then you got to build up. The way it is now isn't the way it's always going to be. Have a sense of time. And boy, I think the starting thing is you got to carve out some energy somewhere. You got to figure out, justify some self-care and say, I don't like the way it is. And so if I'm going to make it different, I have to find some energy to expend to how leave 15 minutes early, say no to something
right.
and walk away from work.
And
It's tough.
sometimes, right, and what you might need to be a better father might have nothing to do immediately with your son or daughter, right? Because maybe
Correct.
if you're
Yep.
sleep deprived, forget everything else. What you
Yeah.
need to do is fix your sleep schedule, or at
Yeah.
least build in 10 to 20-minute naps, nothing longer, because then you start moving into REM sleep and you're less
Yeah.
revived from of it. But it's like so much of that 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 good parenting, there's a huge chunk of it that has nothing to do with your kids, but has
Yeah.
everything to do with how you interact with your kids.
Yeah. With
Yeah.
you. It starts with you. You got to put your own mask on before you put the oxygen mask on the kids so you don't pass
Mhm.
out taking care of them, kind of thing. Yeah. There's got to be
Yeah.
a shorter word for that.
Right. But it's a place where sometimes the right thing to do as a parent is to be selfish.
Yeah.
To make sure, well, you know what, I'm making sure my kids are eating and my kids are sleeping, but then I'm dang well making sure that I'm also eating something decent and
Mhm.
I'm getting sleep too. And
Mhm.
then that, right,
Yeah.
frees up.
We need to
uh,
invent a word other than selfish for that. We need taking care of ourselves so that we have the energy we need to take care of our families as an obligation. It's like,
You
no,
have to
you're
fill your cup before you can fill anyone else's.
yeah, yeah. Because I think of it as being, well, I'm going to be selfish and I'm going to go take some time or something like that. And it's like, no, 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 somebody in there. If you're doing it all day, every day, yeah, that's not good.
right.
But 15 minutes of that a day or an hour or whatever it takes, that's an obligation because
Well,
otherwise you're
and
going to be barking at people.
that's one of those cultural constructs, right? That negative connotations with the word selfish, right? We
Hmm.
tell a kid you're selfish, you're not sharing your toys, or it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
well, you know what? Maybe he should share toys, or maybe she's covered in peanut butter and he doesn't want peanut butter on his Superman,
That's
which
right.
is
Right?
understandable.
That's one of those
Right?
situational ethics things. Yeah,
um,
you got to evaluate.
uh, and right, we that goes back to what do I think everybody, and I do not have an answer for this because I have my answer. I think every father, right, needs to spend some time thinking about, okay, what does it mean to me to be a father,
Hmm.
and what do I want that to look like? And then
Hmm.
is and it is that if you have a vision of the father that you want to be, now you've got a direction to move to, right?
Yes.
Without a vision, and you're already under all this stress, what the heck would you do
Yeah.
Yep,
but
you got to
keep
have a
doing that?
target. Work toward, yeah, set a goal and work towards the goal so you're aimed, in some way.
And I think if you're if you're off track and not being the parent that your kids need, you know, they have multiple ways of letting you know, and some of them can be pretty detrimental to them too. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so it's like when I see a kid who's acting up, right? It would when I'm subbing, right? The first thing that I wonder is what's going on, typically in a boy, but not always, right? There, um, what's going on at home
Yeah.
that it makes sense that he's either looking for so much attention, however he can get it here, or
Yeah.
he's trying to bully that kid around. You know, you know, what's
Destructive
he missing?
attention. But,
You know,
negative attention is better than no attention, right?
yeah.
If there's neglect going on, you see a kid being self-destructive, then that's like,
Or
what the
right,
heck's
if you're
going
coming,
on?
yeah, or coming from a chaotic situation, at least now this is what I
Yeah.
think of when I see those really good manipulator kids.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
who you can watch him move around and start fires. It's like, dang,
Mm-hmm.
It's a survival skill. It's
Mm-hmm.
Darwinian. It's not much
yep,
fun in
this
polite
person
society, but
knows how to is affecting control in a very subtle way.
hmm
Wouldn't it be awesome if we could channel this towards, constructive things instead of
Right.
saving
destructive?
the world, not destroying the world.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
I I feel like I could keep asking you questions all day.
We got to have you back,
Um,
Steve.
yeah,
I don't know what the
we'll have
schedule looks
to.
like. We got to have you back.
I'd love to come back.
I love this. And I think as I've been exploring more dad perspectives to have on the show, I've been finding more that there are coaches out there. There are dads who are coaching other dads, and that the programs exist, the coaching exists, the people exist, and that it's really about looking for it. I think that um, I think that it's harder to find because there's less of you. But I think that if anyone did a Google search for a dad coach, they would find it. And
There's stuff out there.
so I just want to encourage anyone who's listening um, that you share this with someone, anyone, that we spread the word so that the men in our lives are aware of the services that really truly are available to them. I think that
Yeah.
social media and common knowledge show all of the mom classes and birthing classes and parenting classes, and I think that that the dad stuff goes underrepresented. So yeah.
And I just add too is that to look around, right? Because there's a variety, right, of
Mm-hmm.
fathers out there, of coaches out there. You find the one that you're like, oh, this guy's making
Mm-hmm.
sense, right?
You
Because
got
I'm
to
sure
click
there's a
with
couple,
one. Yeah.
yeah, right, and because there's so many ways to be a good dad,
Yeah.
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 and the path to get there is going to be unique for everybody. So whether it's whatever group that you can find, right, or that support, it's like if I was going to like end if I was going to I am ending with this. um Fathers out there, right, no matter where you are in life or how it's going, as long as you are alive, there is a chance,
Yes.
Yeah.
right? It might it and maybe it's a small chance, right, and you've done some damage and those kids are going to hold that against you for, but you can start, you can make small movements, and you can make small movements, bigger movements. And as far as being a dad, right, the game's never over,
There's no
right? Our
statute
kids
of
change, they grow up and
limitations.
they, right, move to Colorado and they start their own lives, right, and that's
I hate
that's
it when they
part of
do
it,
that.
right? But that's, but and I think this is an awesome example too, and I really appreciate the way that you shared that you have had, you do argue, and you've had
Mm-hmm.
arguments,
Oh yeah.
and you know every every new age kind of bracket, right, brings a new set of challenge between the
Mm-hmm.
fathers and
Yeah.
their sons and daughters, and um but
When you get older, it's
there's,
nice because there's some distance now, and you can talk about things you couldn't talk about
yeah,
when you were 12 and 20,
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff. So never give up hope. The statute of limitations on taking care of your kids, healing with your kids, never answering their questions, never runs out, and you can always learn a new trick. Don't count, and all you can change is yourself. You can't fix your kids, right? You can't control them, but you can make yourself open, and they'll come around if you let them.
Steve, tell everyone where they can find you. We'll link all of your stuff in the show notes as well. But
Okay. Well, so if you want to see little tidbits, I have the Best Dad Project on Facebook. But one really thing I'm big on, writing and journaling. So I actually created something free, a PDF on journaling that's got 3 questions
Cool.
that for emotional, you get some emotional awareness, which is sort of the standard questions that you could use. Another set of questions that is used to look at your parenting, if something goes well or wrong, how you can take a little break and dissect it and maybe learn something out of it, and just some general 7 strategies for getting more out of a journal. So if
Cool.
totally free, if you send me an email at steve@steveanderson.coach, right? Send me an email, say, PDF or relational parent, or just say pamphlet, free thing. I will send you it, right? And or if you've got any questions, then that's a really easy way to do it. And every once in a while I'll be sending out freebies, but I don't inundate, because nobody likes that, right?
right. Awesome.
Cool.
Well, we'll link all of that in the show notes so everyone can find you, can find your email. And just thank you so much. Thank you for being here, but also thank you for taking your life experience and transmuting that into serving the world in this way.
Yeah, making the world a better place. It's good to see you out there. Good to know you're out there.
Well, thank you, and that's very humbling.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will see everybody next time. Happy parenting and good luck out there. Well, did you learn anything new? Or have you heard all of this before? Do you agree with us, disagree with us, have a question? We want to see you in our inbox or via the Patreon page in the show notes. Tap on either link to send us your feedback, share your own parenting story, or support our mission of providing a connected community for all parents. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you loved this episode, click on that little star and give us 5 of them so we can get visible to other parents who are looking for us. This is your weekly reminder. Parents, you already have everything you need inside of you. You are a strong, loving, capable parent. And here, you are never alone. I'll see you next week.